Welcome to On the Table with Ashley. This is our food and connection series that explores the many ways people create connection through food, from community gardens and classrooms to dinner tables across the world. The series highlights stories of gathering nourishment, memory, and care. Through insightful conversations with experts from all walks of life, the vulnerable conversations shared over dinner, the scents and recipes that carry memories of home, and the grassroots efforts communities make to combat food insecurity and support one another. Through these conversations, we examine how food unites people, preserves culture, conjures memory, and creates identities. Ultimately, the series reveals the profound role food plays in nearly every human experience. Our guest today is Ken Albala. Ken is a professor of history at the University of the Pacific. He is the author or editor of 14 books on food history, including Beans, A History, which won the 2008 International Society of Culinary Professional Jane Grigson Award. Albala also serves as the co-editor of the journal Food, Culture, and Society. You can learn more about Ken in our show notes. Enjoy.
Ken Albala, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to talk with you today. You have such an interesting background and you've spent so many years loving food and writing about it and teaching and the history and all the things that we can learn as humans. So honestly, I'm so thrilled to be talking with you.
Well, thanks for having me.
So I always like to start hearing where you grew up and what kind of kid you were.
Oh, gosh, I grew up in central New Jersey by the shore, not far from where Bruce Springsteen grew up. And I suppose, I acted as a kid. So that's really all I was interested in, mostly doing theater. And by the time I got high school, I did every single show and even a few in college. And then just decided, boy, this is I can't make this into a profession. And decided to become an academic, which is much harder to do as a profession.
Well, I'm interested to know what role food played in your childhood, because now I would say you're known as one of the most prolific modern food historians, part academic historian, part culinary anthropologist, part practical cooking evangelist. You're a professor and a writer. I believe that you've written or edited over 30 books, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. So did food have a role in your growing up, and how, when you shifted from acting, did you go into teaching, but then specifically in the area of food?
Yeah, well, my family certainly, on my father's side, was very, very interested in food. My grandmother did, cooking. I don't remember her doing anything but cooking, in fact. Like, she was always in the kitchen with a cigarette dangling out of her mouth and her big jiggly arms, making as much as she possibly could to feed her very large, in every sense, family. But my mother was a terrible cook. So I actually grew up at home, eating kind of TV dinners on a tray in front of watching Gilligan's Island. And so it was sort of a reaction to my day-to-day growing up and eating by myself, really, that I thought, eating must be a social event in my household. And by the time I had kids, the only rule we had, or the only rule I imposed at least, was that we had to eat together. However we figured that out, we set aside time and I cooked every day. So that was, I'm very fortunate that I work maybe a mile north of here. So I could, I didn't have to spend a lot of time commuting and all. But I think cooking is, essential to human happiness. And, we people think of it as a chore, which I don't think it is at all. I think it's the best time to spend, is just feeding yourself well and enjoying it.
Well, I know that you've talked about how you will, and we'll get into this, you cook a huge Thanksgiving feast every year for upwards of 30 people, and you also cook nice meals just for yourself. And I think most people don't do both ends of that spectrum, or maybe don't do them well. And I do think that there's this sense many people have that cooking is a chore. I actually love to cook, but I don't love all of the ancillary parts like the cleaning.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that can get in the way of the emotions that people have around cooking, but not around feeding people, because I think almost everyone loves to feed people. So if your mother was not a good cook, your grandmother was, what made you decide to learn how to cook and to cook adventurously and well?
I think I'm very fortunate. Well, one thing, I was put in front of the TV when I was very young, watching The Galloping Gourmet and Julia Child. And, so I was there in a high chair, watching people cook from as far as I could remember. So I think I got some level of competence from that. And by the time I was in college, my freshman year, it was dorm food and it was just terrible. And I thought, I'm not doing this. And me and my roommate got an apartment off campus, and I started cooking, really not knowing what I was doing, not following any cookbook, just saying, oh, I'll throw this in a pan and I'll do this. And so I kind of taught myself, and with the help of watching what people were doing on TV. And this was, the 80s. So it was Martin Yan and Jacques Pepin and Natalie Dupree, and people who you could just watch and learn. They were all excellent educators. I don't think I ever doubted, that I could do it. I wasn't trying to do anything fancy, and just sort of built up my skills from there and learned how to cut with a knife. And I'll tell you, if you do it every day, you gain confidence. And I think what really holds many people back is this fear that they're going to mess up and somehow fail. But so what? You'll eat tomorrow. It's not going to, if you know a few things, it's not going to be completely awful. And I have a friend now who was asked me about a gazpacho recipe, and I said, gazpacho is the simplest thing in the world. All you do is throw tomatoes into a blender and add some olive oil and some bread and some vegetables, and then you garnish it with some more vegetables. You put it in a plate, serve it cold. It's the easiest thing. There's nothing, you don't need stock, you don't need anything. It should be just tomato soup, basically. And she said, oh, I tried it and it took hours and hours. And I was like, what did you do? How could this possibly have gone in? And I thought, all right, let me film it. And I, got a camera out and just started to make it. And I literally threw all the stuff in the blender, poured it in, chopped some vegetables, but it was 1 minute and 30 seconds. And I said, how could you have spent several hours doing this? And I still don't really understand. But I think it's lack of confidence that people think something terrible is going to happen. And that's not the case. And I think, once you learn what you like, you don't have to depend on cookbooks. And actually, I blame cookbooks to a certain extent. Even though I write them, I don't use them to cook, really. I think of them as history, historical sources. But I think people start depending on the instructions, and they follow it to the letter, and they think, oh, I don't have this ingredient, I can't make this. Or, oh, I don't have time, I can't use oregano instead. Well, of course you can, with the exception of some really highly technical baked, cakes and cookies and things, you can throw in whatever you want. And if you only have one onion instead of two, it's going to be fine. It's going to be great. You don't really have to follow a recipe. And that's, of course, the way everyone on earth has ever cooked, is they just started throwing ingredients in a pan and doing whatever. And the sort of dependence on print technology is really very recent. I mean, obviously printing invented 500 years ago or so, but the sort of dependence on a cookbook means that you never really learned how to cook from your parents, and you're thrown into a household or some situation where you have to make do. And many people just think, all right, I have to depend on this physical text, which is a cookbook is a weird thing. It's taking an action, translating it into words as best as you can, and then the person cooking has to retranslate those words back into actions. It's much easier learning from a video or learning directly from the person standing there, which is how everyone has always learned to cook. So we're a weird exception, I would say, the past century or so, when people really depend on cookbooks. And unfortunately, cookbooks have to sell to the lowest common denominator. They have to assume you really don't know how to cook, and a kind of cookbook made for people who are pretty proficient is very rare now. Those are they don't sell well because they assume people just really don't know how and need guidance. But what the metaphor I like to use is if you are learning to drive and you need to get from point A to point B or somewhere else, you kind of get a spatial map in your head of where you're going, what route you're going. And if this road is closed, you go on another way, but you sort of understand physically where you are and where you're going. GPS has ruined that because now people have no idea where they're going, and they trust the thing, even if it tells them turn onto the railroad tracks. And this really happened, And it's very much, I think the same thing has happened to cooking proficiency, is that people think you must follow this recipe, and cookbook writers justifiably complain when people make substitutes that are wild and crazy, and the recipe doesn't work, and then they blame them. But I think, the best cookbook is one that makes itself obsolete, that people actually learn from and just say, okay, I don't need it anymore.
Does such a thing exist?
I would say some, yeah. My favorite cookbooks. Gosh, what did I learn? I think Julie Sani. Do you know that classic Indian cookbook that came out in the '80s? Again, I bought it when I was a kid and learned how to do Indian food, and I haven't opened it in years. It's sitting on my shelf still, but I just don't. I don't really need to look at it. I remember how to do those. I think the Silver Palette. Do you remember those cookbooks from
Yes.
the '80s? Those taught you how to do it. And if I look at the recipe for tabbouleh and I open that page up and it's stained, I can see past things that I learned how to cook from it. I haven't followed the recipe in so many years because I had know the basic proportions, and it always works.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to try to weave in some of the books that you've written. And I believe that the Lost Art of Real Cooking is reminding us that cooking is a craft, not a formula. And we don't need to exactly follow recipes, and that the beauty comes when we actually let go of those precise measurements. Now, of course, not for baking, where it's a little bit more science than art. And feeling our way through intuition, sensory experience, and lived wisdom, preferably learning from people we love who have cooked dishes we love, but videos or other, people that we respect and admire in the kitchen as well. You also shared with me that this book is closest to your heart. So maybe you could talk a little bit about this book, why it's closest to your heart, and sort of the main thing, and maybe that is the main thing you'd like people to take away from it, which is just like, get back to hands-on intuition, sensory experience in the kitchen.
That's exactly it. But let me tell you how that book came about, because it's a really bizarre story.
Okay.
So I was in my office and someone called me up and said, I'm writing a book on constipation and I want to know sort of the medical advice going back to the ancient Greeks and stuff. And my first book was about nutritional theory. And so I said, yeah, I have a ton of information, but it's buried in my notes. And if you're willing to come to my office and look with me, it'll take us an hour or two, and that's perfectly fine. And I just don't want to do this on my own time and give you the quotes. Just help me out, and I'll give you any information you want. And so she came to my office with an assistant, and we started chatting. And the assistant, so we got through it much, much quicker, just piling through these notes. And it turned out this assistant, who was a very young woman, I think 20 maybe, turned out that we had like sort of things in common, common interests in cheese making and sourdough bread long before it became popular, and making preserves and things that were just really historical, but not, things that people just don't do anymore because they think they're difficult and dangerous and that somehow you're going to harm yourself. And so we were chatting about this, and I just sort of jokingly said, we should just do a book about this. And the other woman who was writing the constipation book said, oh, well, by the way, I'm an agent, and okay, send me a proposal. And it just happened. It sold to what was then the Penguin Group in New York. So it was just, everything just sort of fell into place. She didn't end up being the agent. So another person at the thing did. So in any case, this woman and I, Rosanna is her name, did this book together, and seamlessly, to such an extent that there were some things I knew how to do that she didn't. Curing meat, I was doing a lot of. She was much better at cheese and preserves. And so we just put the book together, and for some strange reason, our voices sound very similar, like the way we're writing. So we actually had to put an initial to say whose recipe it was, because it's not obvious otherwise. And we met once after that, and I've still only met her maybe once or twice in our lives. We don't know each other well at all, and yet we wrote 2 books together that were trade press cookbooks. But why I think it was closest to my heart is it kind of encapsulates my philosophy of cooking, is that it should be a lot of fun, that you should always be experimenting or trying something different, and if it doesn't work, so what? You'll eat tomorrow, and if it does, you've had a lot of fun sort of expressing yourself creatively, feeding other people, learning about how your ingredients and your tools work, and learning techniques that are just not done anymore. How many people make salami at home? It's really easy to do, and I think they get frightened that we have to follow scientific protocol, or we're going to get sick or something. And in fact, it's not the case. It's really simple to do. I have no equipment. I have no not even a stuffer. I chop everything by hand, and I put it in the casings by hand. And it's just such a delight when people say, you made this, you have a machine. What, and I said, no, it's very simple and cheap to do. and things like that, which pickling especially, I love. I just did a big Atlas of Fermentation as well, which sort of draws from that, my past 20 years experience making pickles. And they still fail sometimes. One I made last week is not bubbling, it's not fermenting or anything. It's still edible, but it's not nice and sour and crispy. I have no idea why. But that's fine. It doesn't really matter. I'm not investing, a ton of time and effort or money into it. I'm just doing it for fun.
Well, I'm actually signing up for a 3-day canning course in Salt Lake City, and it's hard to get into. I've been on a wait list for like a year, and I do think that there's this, so it's both for like preserves, but also for pickling. This sense of like, it's so hard. I'm going to do something that could adversely affect my family if I give it to them.
Well, I don't want to discourage you from this because it's a great fun, but canning is completely different thing than fermentation.
Well,
In fact,
they're
it's
doing
exactly
both.
the opposite, because canning kills everything and puts it in a sterile environment,
Right.
and then it becomes shelf stable. But there are certain things that can happen with canning, like botulism, which are never going to happen in fermentation, because then the pH lowers naturally through bacteria. And if something goes bad, it'll be mushy, or it'll be completely impalatable, or it'll have mold growing on top. You'll know it immediately. So there's apparently not a single incident of anyone harming themselves with a homemade fermented pickle of any kind.
Amazing.
It can't happen.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the traditional way where you really don't need any technical know-how at all. It's just, chop up cabbage, take a handful of salt, put it on top, scrunch it up, put it in a jar. That's it. And 10 days, it's done. So I think that's maybe why fermentation workshops are really kind of dull, because there's nothing hard or technical about it at all. You're not even turning on the heat.
Yeah. But the canning, I think, will be interesting they're going to cover tomato-based, and also fruit-based.
Those are hard. They're hard to do. I mean, you have to have the acidity right in the tomatoes, and you have to have a canning, bath to boil the whole thing. And it's a little. I mean, I've done it. I love it. And in fact, if you're growing your own tomatoes, I think canning it's really the only way to do it. Make like a passata. Just grind them up, remove the skins and seeds, and put it in bottles. And everyone in Italy does that.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think I just finished a series on death rituals. And one of the things that I talked about with a number of funeral directors is we've gotten in this country so far removed from the physicality of death. Like in the beginning of our country, we were so familiar with the sights, sounds, and smells of death that in some ways it made death easier for us to process. And now it's so removed from us that it's much harder. I think the same is true with our food. So
Absolutely.
It's, I actually have never thought of making my own salami, but now I'm going to get your cookbook and try it.
Well, not to trivialize this topic, because obviously very serious, but I think this goes for animals too. Understanding where they come from, that there's a very good way to raise them and a very bad way to raise them, which is most of what we do in the US. And the very fact that when you buy meat, it's in a little styrofoam packet. There's nothing to hint that it was ever part of an animal, and we just don't like to be reminded of that fact when you go back a century and people killed their own chickens. It was just routine. People knew how to do it and knew how to eviscerate it, and I've done a little bit of butchery and things like that, but it's physically hard. But when you do it yourself, I think you're like sort of taking responsibility for the life of the animal in a way that you, if you don't think about it and you're completely divorced from it, it just, you forget about what goes on.
I agree. So to me, learning how to do some of these things, to can my own preserves or tomatoes, or it's just getting me a little bit closer to the food. And I think that there is a benefit in that, in how we eat. And, it's funny, I have a 17-year-old and a 20-year-old, and my 17-year-old is very into health right now. And so hopefully we'll come back around to people caring more about how their food is prepared, how they're preparing it, how close they're getting to it, and really understanding the nutritional value of, a jar of tomato sauce that's probably going to have a lot of sugar in it versus one that you make yourself.
Yep. And I think also doing it yourself, you're not going to waste much of it. You're going to think about it more carefully because you spent the time watering it and caring for it and extending its life on the shelf and using it with care, I think becomes much more palpable when you've grown the stuff. I mean, right outside the window where I'm sitting now, there's a Meyer lemon tree that I make Moroccan pickled lemons out of. There's a grapevine to the right. So I try to make wine, and it's terrible wine often. It smells like socks some years, but it's mine. And, I like the fact that I can do it all with my hands, and a few olive trees on the other side of the fence. So I think that's, growing food, it gives you a much closer connection to nature and the world in a way that I think you can go through life and just not pay attention to things that are really very important and give happiness and are important from an environmental perspective or from just an aesthetic perspective. I out of nowhere just a couple of years ago started carving wood from trees that was and it started with that olive tree. That's what made me think of it, is one of the limbs was extending over the sidewalk. And I thought, I really have to trim this because people can't get around it. And I cut the wood and I was like, wait, and I planted these trees, by the way. And I thought, this is really beautiful. Let me try and carve something out of it. I had no idea what I was doing. I used a pocket knife, and it was terrible, terrible spoon that I started with, and just sort of slowly understood, oh, you need a hook knife. Oh, most of the work is actually done with an axe, a small axe. And then I realized people were throwing away really lovely wood all through the neighborhood, in the park across the street, on campus. So my walk to work, I pass wood all the time. Sometimes people see this crazy person with a big log on his shoulder, walking down the street. Happens all the time. And so I'm hoping to actually get a book out of this, partly about the wood, but what it's done is it's made me not only learn what species of trees are around me, but really have an appreciation for the way they grow differently, they behave differently, their life cycles are slightly different, and the way the rings inside the xylem and phloem is structured is very different in different trees, and that's just appreciating the world, in a way that I would never have done if I just said, oh, it's just scrap wood, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that there's this, and we're going to get into the gathering portion because I'm really focused in this series on food and gathering. But I think there's this really important aspect of I'm a big believer, and I've always tried to teach this to my boys, like, you have to love yourself before you can love other people. So there's this sense of enriching yourself with all of these aspects. So just the intentionality, the connection to these everyday things. Like,
That's
we
absolutely
all
right.
eat every day. We
And
all
honestly,
walk every day.
the best part about carving spoons is giving them away. Yesterday, I was at a winery of a guy who I know, the winemaker, and I brought a spoon that was made out of one of his wines, staves from his wine barrels, soaked in wine that he made. Handed it to him. It was like, what? And that was perfect. It was as much pleasure as you can get out of carving a piece of wood.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much pleasure in giving as well. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the gathering side of this equation. So your newest book, I believe the newest book, is Opulent Nosh. And that feels like it's a culmination of a long history of fascination. And we can talk about your earlier books too, but with abundance, indulgence, spectacle, and culinary excess. So food is not just sustenance, but it's also pleasure, theater, and cultural expression. And in the book, you explore how societies across time have used food to signal, whether it's status or celebration, expressing generosity or building ritual. Can you talk about the book and what you want readers to take away from it?
Yeah, I think it was actually much simpler than you made out. But
Okay.
it's so this was a pandemic book, as happened to most people who are writers. We're stuck at home, and what did we do? We wrote. And I conceived of this as a breakfast book. And I thought,
Okay.
breakfast is the one meal I actually eat myself every morning, by myself, cook for myself, and I can do whatever I want. I've cooked for years and years with people who had this aversion or this allergy, or my wife doesn't eat meat. So it's just kind of, breakfast is the time I can just play and have fun. And I thought this would make a fun book. I posted stuff on social media and whatever. And every agent I spoke to said, breakfast? No one's interested in breakfast. No one eats breakfast. And if they do, they eat the same thing every day. And I'm like, really? I can't be. And, talk about rejection after rejection after rejection. So I said, okay, this is not going to sell. And let me try to change the book. Let me just take the word breakfast out and put in the very, Yiddish cup word nosh, which everyone understands. Kind of, it's not a real meal. It's just a little thing. But most of what I eat for breakfast really isn't breakfast food. It's things you can nosh on very easily. So I just took out breakfast, put in nosh, and still couldn't really get it. And I thought, maybe I'll self-publish this, just for kicks. And realized, okay, you're going to have to do all the marketing and publicity yourself and have a garage full of books. And I'm just not interested in that. I'm interested in writing, not in being a publisher. And finally, I posted something on Facebook, and an old friend of mine who works for the University of Alabama Press said, "Oh, we'll publish it." I'm like, okay, that's fine. And they did, people eyebrows go up. University of an academic press in Alabama is doing a cookbook. Okay, that seems weird. They did such a beautiful job with it. It is so beautifully designed. The cover is lovely, and it's just I couldn't be happier with what they did with it. The photos are all mine, stuff I took pictures as I was eating it for breakfast, and they're crazy combinations. They're very much like what I had for breakfast this morning, which was a tamagoyaki burrito, basically. So, and that's I've never really gotten out of the habit of doing that, of playing with food, and sometimes it turns out wonderfully and looks great, and why not do it? But the point of this was that you don't have to take what you're doing very seriously. You don't need a recipe. And that if you can just go into the kitchen, look at whatever you have in the fridge and say, I'm putting this together. I don't care about what people say is right or wrong to throw together, or as long as it tastes good, I'm eating it. And obviously you can share this too. It's not something you have to do by yourself. And I think, gosh, I like writing cookbooks, even though I'm philosophically averse to them. I don't like the idea of people using cookbooks. So what I hope happens with this is that people read it and are inspired and say, okay, I'm done with this. I don't need the book anymore. I'm going to just go in the kitchen and play and have fun. Ideally, I hope that happens.
Can you share like a couple of the craziest recipes that you think were amazing?
Oh gosh, I don't have a copy up here, but it's downstairs. There were a few that were really strange. I don't think I put in anything that was really totally outlandish. The project that was completely outlandish is the one right before that, which was a book on gelatin. Okay. And there, it was literally social media that pushed me into doing this. It was a dare, basically. Someone said, go and look at this Facebook group called Show Me Your Aspects. And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. I thought exactly what you're thinking now. And I ended up looking and thinking, this is crazy. People are making not retro, dreadful Jell-O salads from the 50s. People are really rethinking what Jell-O means. And I said, let me try it. Let me just make a Jell-O. And I remember doing one that was ouzo, Greek liquor. Feta cheese and pita and chickpeas and things, and I put them together exactly the way you would eat them otherwise, but in the form of a Jell-O. And it just came out this sort of shining orb, and people really liked it. And I said, okay, I'm going to do another, and then another, and eventually they started calling me the Jiggle Daddy. So I just embraced that and said, all right, that's fine. And used to get thousands of hits of likes on Facebook, which is really bizarre. There's no way I can do that now. And I thought, okay, I just have to get a book out of this. And again, very unlikely, bizarre publisher, University of Illinois Press did it, and it's nice looking. I did all the shots in that one also, and I think I put a lot of really, really strange things together. The one that got, I think, the most, well, there was an octopus, a whole baby octopus set into some kind of liquor Jell-O. But the one that people really liked for some strange reason was a slice of home-cured bacon, a really ripe tomato, a piece of lettuce, and set into a triangle of a martini set in Jell-O. So it was a BLT and a martini lunch, put into one. So you picked it up and bit into it, and it was crunchy and savory, and it got you tipsy. So every single thing in that book was also booze laden. So that was fun experimenting. Doing the research was great fun. But I would say that was the strangest experience that I've done in the kitchen. And people expect that of me now. They assume that I'm going to.
You have to live up to it.
Serve something really, really bizarre. Although I have to say the project which I just finished is a video series for the Great Courses on forgotten foods. And I thought, all right, if I'm going to write about this stuff, I really need to know firsthand what I'm talking about. I need to taste these things. I can't just say, oh, this is interesting. I have no idea what it is, but you have to go. So I'd eaten a lot of things, a few of which I regret. This past Thanksgiving, I served possum. And I thought, come on, people have eaten possum. How bad can it be? And like a dope, I did not follow their directions. They all said, boil it to death, boil it for hours and hours and hours. And I thought, oh, this is a young possum. It was little. I bought it online, actually. Well, I suppose I could have picked one up off the street here. But I just said, let me marinate it, and I'll put it on the barbecue, and I'll cook it well, and it'll be like chicken, right? No, not at all. It was really dreadful. I mean, it was greasy and rank, and it just was not a pleasant flavor at all.
So
Anyways,
we forgot that one for a reason.
we did. That's exactly exactly what I learned.
What's a forgotten food that should come back?
Gosh, there are a lot. The one that I'm sort of on a kick about right now is millet. Sits in our bird feeder. There's no good reason we don't eat it. It's tasty. It's really drought resistant. You know, doesn't have glutens in it, and it's really healthy and environmentally sound. And I have no idea why we don't eat millet every day instead of rice or corn or things that I guess because we don't grow it in the U.S. and it's not marketed well.
Interesting. Okay. Can you talk about, and this book I think you edited, you didn't write, At the Table, Food and Family Around the World, analyzing the different ways that families eat around the table and how patterns reveal cultural values. But I think at the end of the day, it's usually about the same things: connection, continuity. Are there some examples from that book that would be interesting to learn from?
Sure. My apprehension going into that project was that the family dinner was falling apart, and there are people who argue that the way we learn to not just socialize, but even our political comportments, the way we interact with other people, and comes basically from kids sitting at the table with their family and saying, "How was your day? Oh, I did this today and I did that," and interacting at a place where it's neutral field. No one has to win the argument. It's perfectly okay to disagree and get through. And this who is it, Janet Flaming, I think, did a book that was she's a political scientist, exactly about that somehow our lack of political comportment and our rudeness to each other politically stems from the fact that people just don't eat together anymore, and we grab something here and rush off there, and whatever. And I would extend that to health, and I kind of wanted to know, is this a pattern that really happens around the world? Who's doing the cooking, where they and the shopping, who's cleaning up, does the whole family participate, do they do it regularly, what do they eat? And it was more of a kind of I don't know, an ethnographic survey, and I wanted to have a family in each place that I chose. I don't know, this maybe a couple of dozen around the world, and I said, you write this. You write your family story, and I will put it together, and send me some pictures of what you're doing, and I'll put it together as an ethnography, let's say, just to document how the family meal has changed or disappeared, or what's happening at that particular juncture. And so it was kind of really surprising. There were weird results. People ate together even if they didn't cook together. People ate at unusual times based on their schedules, and the people who you would expect would have held on to their family traditions, like Europeans, let's say, didn't actually at all, which was really surprising. Or they only ate together on holidays, or so it was. And the other very surprising thing is, we think of a family as heterosexual parents and 2.5 children. I always felt bad for that half a kid, but anyway, it was but that's not the way families are shaped at all. And so I tried to be very inclusive for very non-traditional families as they were constructed. In fact, I think there was even one chapter with one person, and so that was a family. That's just the way it turned out.
So were there any through lines? I mean, are you saying, and actually, that the family dinner is disappearing throughout the globe, or is it?
It is.
That's true.
Yeah.
And so Janet Flaming, is it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Flaming posited that the fact that we're losing the family dinner, and would talk about politics, among many other things, around the dinner table. Because we're losing that, we're losing our ability to be with people who have different viewpoints. Is that?
Yeah, and to discourse rationally with them, because we have forgotten how to compromise at the table and listen to people, not just say you're wrong and point at them and criminalize them. From both sides. It's not one group or another. It's everyone has really forgotten political discourse, which I mean, it's anecdotal. There's no way to prove there's a direct connection, but they rise together. Very, very clearly.
Well, it's so fascinating, because one of the main reasons that I do this podcast and have my brand is that I think we need more human connection, and we need more curiosity and less judgment. We need to remember how to disagree with kindness, and it's not that hard.
That's right. I agree with you.
But we still do family dinners in our house, and I grew up doing them as well. So that's pretty fascinating. What else did you learn in doing the research for this book?
Well, basically that the food industry kind of intends to get people to stop cooking, like convenience foods and takeout and things that would, intentionally de-skill you. They're intended to say, I mean, like I sort of had a whole slew of questions. People could answer them or not if they weren't relevant. But I wanted to know, does anyone like make stock at home? Like just take scraps from vegetables and bones and everything they use, put it in the freezer or keep it somewhere, and then make a batch of stock every month that you can make soup out of or flavor your rice or do whatever you want. And that's something that I think routinely a century ago people used to do, just in the interest of thrift or taste, just because it tastes better. And almost no one does it anymore. It's just because you can buy. In some places, it just amazing. In Africa, they use Maggie cubes. Bouillon cubes are now traditional there. Weirdly enough, and Nestle just said we're going to sell this shit to them, and they're going to eat it. And so they forgot how to make things like iru, which is a bean. It's a tree with a bean pod on it, Parkia big globosa, and it's fermented into this very pungent, aromatic condiment that you cook with. But the effect is basically the same as if you throw a Maggie cube in, and now everyone uses the cube because why would I do this at home? And it's like people would make this locally. Women would almost always women would do it, and they'd sell it to their neighbors and at the market and have a job and have an income. And and it was, and someone went in there and said, oh well, we really need to monetize this, and so we're going to take this technique away from you, put it in a laboratory, make sure we isolate the bacteria that will produce this stuff, and then we'll sell it. And lo and behold, you can go on Amazon and buy a bottle of Iru now, which is good, but like, are the women who traditionally made it still doing it? Is it still in the setting of that community? Is it, is it going to displace Maggie cubes? Absolutely not. So things like that. That's just an example. And that actually isn't in that book. That's in the fermentation atlas that I just did, but it's the one that's closest to mind. But there's dozens upon dozens of things like that people used to do. And I think ultimately, if I were to ask someone, well, why don't you do this anymore? And they'll say, well, I don't have the time. Even if they know how to do it, they'll say time. It's all a matter of time. And it makes me think that we have gone really, really wrong in budgeting our workday in the way that we're expected to work, not just 9 to 5 and commuting and getting the kids to soccer practice and doing this and that. It's just that our lives are packed with things in such a way, and it's mostly work, that I think we should have a maximum work hour, and that people should not be allowed to work after 40 hours or something. That the time should be spent with other people, and cultivating your own personal interests and things. And sometimes someone will ask me, oh, you probably don't sleep, do you? Or how do you get all these things done? And I tell them, well, first of all, I never work at night. I'm home by 5, if not before, and I never work on weekends, anything under any circumstances. I just refuse to do it. And I spend time walking and carving and making pots and cooking a lot. And I think that's sort of something people should be allowed to cultivate through their lives in the way that our American capitalist work schedule, demands you to put in more time. I think that's the problem behind everything. I think really is just a too busy workday. If people had the time to make stock, of course they'd do it. It's easy. You just throw stuff in a pot and you let it boil. It's not difficult at all.
I know that in the United States, we are extremely work focused and many of us work too many hours, but I don't believe that's true all over the world. And your book covered families all over the world. So if they weren't in Africa, if they're no longer making this, whatever it was,
Iru, yeah.
Iru, and in other countries, they're no longer following these traditions that maybe take more time. Is it always time that is the dreaded culprit?
I think it's time and it's convenience foods being sold to them, and upward mobility pushes people to work more and put in more hours and get more education and be upwardly mobile financially. So I think that the people who I was able to write chapters, I tried as hard as I could to have economic diversity, but clearly there's a whole class of people I wasn't going to capture in this because they don't speak English for one, or they're just not connected to the world of academic publishing. So, and a lot of people were my friends. So, they're going to think like me and act like me and have the same social pressures. But I think in general, I think I got no statistical sample. I mean, this is totally random, sample of people. But for a particular class of people, they are cooking less and less and eating together less, and submitting to the interests of stockholders. Stockholders want money and businesses have to make a profit, and if they don't, they put that burden onto their workers and say, you work harder. I think that's just fact.
But that was true decades ago when we cooked more. So is it a change in gender roles with more women in the workforce? Have you thought more deeply? Because honestly, this sounds very depressing.
Well, I think you're right. It is gender roles. I mean, my mother was of a generation where she didn't have to work outside the home. So, but generations before, most women actually did work, of course. It wasn't they didn't have that luxury. But somehow they also had enough, they didn't commute, they didn't work far from home. And when the bell rang at 5 o'clock, they were home. They had time to cook in a way that I think people not only don't, but I think the food industry is making it very difficult for people to not just put in a TV dinner or a frozen dinner when it's 6 o'clock and the kids are hungry and you're just like, I don't have anything in the fridge. What am I going to cook? And I don't remember how to do this. And they didn't like it last time. And so, of course, I'm just going to give them. And it has consequences for health, too. I mean, you think about the junk that goes into food like that is, a lot of very ultra processed things, and it's in their interest to make it taste good. And it does. It's not like this is bad tasting food. It actually tastes it's engineered to be very tasty, and it's actually engineered to make you eat more. So, because the more you eat, the food itself doesn't cost the business so much money. They're getting you to buy it and create brand loyalty. And when your kid wants this brand of frozen pizza, you're going to do it because you want them to be happy. But I think people are deluded into thinking that convenience is supreme.
So do you believe that the beauty of a table, so the aesthetics of it, the intentionality, changes the way that people connect around the table?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a vase of flowers makes a very big difference. Beautiful utensils that you stop and think about. I think people generally think a plate should be a white blank canvas. And I'm like, why? Plates can be lovely, and you can change them from season to season, and they can match you often make bowl. I've been a potter for years and years. In fact, 2 stories down from where I'm sitting is my studio. I'm upstairs, and then there's downstairs, and there's a basement. And that was just a weird accident. I was in grad school and saw an ad for pottery lessons, and this was in my neighborhood. I was like, oh, sure, why not? We'll just take pottery lessons. And I ended up actually working there as an apprentice with a Ph.D., believe it or not. But I did it before I got a job. So I've always had a studio, and I think that you can change the shape of the bowl to match the food rather than the other way around. And that some things really want a deep bowl if you're going to spoon them out. Some need a shallow bowl. If you're eating matzo ball soup, you actually need a shallow bowl so you can cut the matzo balls, right? A soup plate, as they call it in Eastern Europe. And you want a clear broth so you can see all the ingredients in it. And some things, I think different vessels and different utensils should match the cuisine and what you're cooking. And it really makes you stop and slow down and think in a way that, I'm standing here. I know viewers listening can't see it, but I'm holding a cup from my last firing. And it was sort of an experiment. I don't know what I was thinking of making the upper lip curve inward. And I thought maybe it's going to make you dribble or anything. It's not. It actually works better than one that goes straight up, because if one straight up tilts a little, it spills. This doesn't. It's kind of like a safety lip. I don't know. And it intentionally does not have a handle, because when you have a handle, you can chug. Here you actually have to stop and think, and and it's very pleasant to hold in your hand. In a way that I think something mass produced, if it broke, wouldn't. I mean, I break these all the time, so that's not a question. But I don't know, when you can feel that someone has had their hands on something to make it, makes it far more pleasurable. And why should the food you eat and the utensils you use, and everything around you should be beautiful. I mean, it's a craft aesthetic that goes back to William Morris, if not, much further, is that, you know, cheap mass produced things are just that, and they're made to go in the trash. And when they
Yeah.
break, that's where they end up in a trash heap. Whereas something like this, I always joke to my friends that sometimes when things break, I bury them in the yard, put them in pots and stuff. And some archaeologist thousands of years from now is going to say there was a pottery culture here, and look at all these shards and things. And well, anyway, but yeah, every part of your daily life should be beautiful, I think.
I totally agree. And intentional, like it should bring something to you. The feel of the material, how it rewarms for me in the microwave, how like all of these things actually matter. Around the dinner table or a gathering, I also agree that the aesthetics make a difference. I love this idea of different vessels for the food that you're serving. If people can do that, or even with a special piece, like even just a serving piece.
That's right. And why does everything have to match?
Yeah.
That's an industrial aesthetic. It's just, everything has to be the same. Well, look at a Japanese table. There's ceramic, a wooden bowl, a metal chopstick, all sorts of different things made of different materials, have different textures and feelings in your hand. And I think that's a great approach. And not everyone eats the same amount of food. Why should everyone have the same size plate or bowl, right? Some people like smaller, some people like bigger. That's fine.
And I wonder if there are things you can do. I do think there are some things you can do to try to make a special dinner stand out. And I think we do try to do those. But my mother set a beautiful table. She was an amazing hostess, a very good cook. And my memories are more around, I would say, like rituals. So either like the Jewish holidays where she would cook, and my stepdad is also a very good cook, very specific. Like you can have an argument about matzo balls. Like, do you like firm matzo balls? Do you like not so firm matzo balls?
They've got to be in between. They've got to be in between, right?
I remember these things. Maybe it's because every year we had them. Or like a favorite birthday cake she would make. She made this ice cream birthday cake with Heath bars on top. Anyway, these specific things that were ritualized. Mm-hmm. And so even though she cooked many, many things, the things I remember the most are the more ritualized ones. I don't know if that's the same for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Thanksgiving I do every year, and it has to be the same. It has to be a traditional. Even if I cook a possum, I'm cooking the regular Thanksgiving also for everyone. And there's things that I don't particularly like, but I have to make them. The string bean casserole, which came off the back of a Campbell's soup can. Ultimately, you can't have Thanksgiving without it. And sweet potatoes. And anyway, yeah, it's absolutely right. A ritual. We still do Passover every year, and it's just the same exact meal, but that's good.
So let's talk about your Thanksgiving for a second. So you said you often have upwards of 30 people for Thanksgiving, and you do all of the cooking.
Well, it depends. Sometimes a good friend of mine will come and we'll play in the kitchen all day, which is it gets the cooking done. But yeah, it's all made right in my house right then, and I don't let people bring anything unless there's a specific pie they must have, and I'm not going to cook it. And wine, I say bring wine. But otherwise, yeah, I've got it down to a kind of science. So I know when the turkey needs to go in, and I make the stuffing first and let that. So yeah, I mean, I can do it in my sleep basically.
And you enjoy it.
It's so much fun. It's the best day, and I'm usually, you start out with a boulevardier, which is bourbon and Campari, and and by the time Thanksgiving rolls around, doesn't matter what happens. It's all fun and good.
I think we know what we have to get back to, but is there anything that we can pull through history and all of the books you've written and all of the periods that you've studied with food?
Well, I think you have actually hit on something vital, not just about our species, but actually all living creatures, is that food is actually a mode of communication. That when we choose food and the way we cook it and present it and share it is we're trying to tell other people something. Now, that could be so simple as look at my sophisticated taste, or look how much money I have because I bought this $50 steak, or look at how much I care about you that I put in this time and devoted this to making something for your happiness. And sometimes it's a much more complicated message. It could be a political statement if you're in that kind of space, but it is usually laden with class prejudices and preferences. It's laden with culture. The whole baggage of your cultural background comes out on a plate. If you are serving fried chicken, it means something to one person. It means something very different if you're African American background, when, chicken legs were a way a family supported themselves and became stereotyped. And there are people I know who won't eat that in public because they don't want to support the stereotype. So it really depends on who you are and the situation and who the audience is and how much you're performing your personality and background and race and ethnicity and everything else and class. But I think people make the mistake of thinking their food is neutral. It's not. It's always saying something. And of course, the best meals are those where clearly the person has taken the time and effort to make you happy. Briette Savarin, who is the most quoted, food writer, early 19th century, late 18th, early 19th century French author. What everyone misquotes, they say, "Oh, you are what you eat." That's not him. It was tell me what a person eats and I will tell you what they are, which is a much more interesting kind of thing.
Right. Well, I love Ina Garten, and one of her quotes is, and I'm not going to get this exactly right, but I hope you know that when I invite you to dinner, I'm saying I love you. And that, I think, is, sort of the flip side of that.
She's genuine. She really is. People think this is some gimmick or whatever. I've met her once and she was just the most delightful person, and she's only like 4 feet tall, which you would never know. I tower over her and I'm only 5'6", and I'm going, oh my gosh, you're so teeny.
It is it is really a gift to invite people into your home and to feed them. And the other thing that I like to say, and I have 5 questions that I like to ask at the end of every episode, so I will ask you this too, but sure. Is that the most important thing is to be present. So the food is actually, I don't think, the most important thing of a successful gathering. I think the most important thing is to be present and to show that you really want these people in your home.
So let me add to that, because the advice that I give to my students was given to me by my freshman astronomy professor as an undergrad. And at the time I thought about it, and maybe I take it to heart every time I say it more. But he said, the key to happiness and success is be where you are and do what you're doing. Like, don't be thinking about your game later or worrying about something you did in the past. Living in the present, which is exactly what you said, it's really not easy to do. I mean, you're always anticipating or, whatever it is. But if you can live in the moment, you get much more out of life at every point and become more amenable to other people too. I think that's, it's hard to connect to someone when they're worrying about the exam they have tomorrow.
Agreed. Okay, well, before we get to the last the 5 questions that I have, is there anything that we haven't talked about? Any of the books you've written that you want to talk about? I know you also love your first book.
Yeah. They're all such completely different children. My first book was, I wrote as a dissertation to start with, and I didn't really realize the incredible luxury you have in graduate school of not having department meetings and, all sorts of other life stuff happening. I just focused for 3 years, literally sat down in a library in New York and read these books and churned that thing out. And I didn't realize I would never have the opportunity to do that again. Just in terms of focus. My Latin was much better. I look back at that and go, how the hell did you do that? Like, really do that? Took notes by hand. I didn't know how to type. I didn't have a computer even. So that's, and I think it served in a certain sense. I actually had to sit down and read about 100 books in half a dozen languages, took notes by hand. And that meant that coming out of it, I knew that material so well that if I actually could use a search engine or heaven forfend AI, it would have been a really crappy book and been completely forgettable. And I would not have known the topic very well. And I have to say, the last book that I did on fermentation was written very quickly, in 6 months or so. It was commissioned. I did it for a design company, Atlas of Fermentation. And I finished writing it about a year ago, and it's finally in print. I could show it to you. It's right over there. And I don't really even remember what's in it. It's just that, and maybe that's age. I have no idea, but I don't know that topic really well because I was writing quickly, getting the information I could and just spitting it out, not even really taking notes. I just wrote every day. I don't like to write that way. That's why I'm not, I don't adore that book so much. And I know you're not supposed to say that about your own children, but it was, I did it because it was money, I guess. And I like the topic a lot. But my first book was really, I adored writing. I really liked doing the book on beans. I had a sabbatical, and I thought I'm just going to have fun with this, and did most of the research at home, so it was, on a computer, but also wrote it very quickly in a semester. And I just had a ball writing it. And I think it was the point where my writing was the most, on point, because it's really hard to, academic writing is one thing and it doesn't appeal to most people, and popular writing doesn't have the same rigor. I think I just hit it right down the middle on that book, and perhaps not in others.
I'm going to try to sum up and you correct me or update. So the more we can get back to closer to the food that we're consuming, whether it's animals, fruits, plants, whatever, we will have more meaning in our food. It'll be healthier food. And maybe even when we're sharing it with others, we will feel like we're giving more of a gift to them. And sitting around the table together, we need to get back to doing it more, not only because it's very enjoyable, but also so that we can relearn how to disagree with kindness.
Yeah. And I know, people say, following, I think, paraphrasing Hippocrates, that you should just eat to live, not live to eat. But I think that's wrong. I think you should live to eat. It's the one thing that everyone has to do, and we have to do it on a regular basis. I guess everyone needs to sleep, but not everyone. But it's a basic biological necessity. So to say that this is unimportant, or I'm just going to do whatever, let's get it over with as quickly as possible, I think you're missing out on what it means to be human, really. And not everyone likes to cook, and I still don't believe that. I think it's hardwired in us to an extent that as much as we are storytellers, as much as we sing by instinct, or beat drums, or have to dance, I think that's hardwired in us as a species. I think cooking is too. And to let someone else do it is just kind of a shame. It's just sad. Eating alone is not sad. I think on any level. I think eating a TV dinner is sad on every level.
Yeah, well said. Okay, let's jump into my 5 questions. The first is, as we explore in my brand, Amatand, which is French for to take care of your soul. Because again, I think you have to start taking care of yourself before you can take care of others. Objects can hold a lot of meaning for us. They can tie us to the past, enable us to be more present, which you so eloquently talked about, sometimes even take us into the future. Can you share an object from your life, whether you still have it or not, that holds a lot of meaning for you, and tell us why?
Oh, so years ago, I was in Cambridge in England at a folk festival, which was one of the strangest things, because I went with a friend, and we didn't really have enough money to stay anywhere. So we just went. I think we had enough for a few pints of beer or whatever. And we slept in a churchyard one night. It was just totally bizarre. And so I had a pound left. And at that point, a pound was a pint. You could buy a pint for one pound. And I thought, I'm just going to spend this on something ridiculous. And it was a little sheep, this little fluffy sheep made of wool.
Very cute.
And it was in one of those 19th century, vases that's a bell, a glass bell.
So is that sheep special for you because it brings you back to that time?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And it's just this little cuddly thing, which has been in my office since I got the job in 1984, and never took it out of there. I never touched it again, in that time. And then just, bring it home, made me remember how nice it was.
Amazing. Can you share a favorite tradition? It could be your Thanksgiving, but it could be something from when you were a child, something that you do with your family today. It could revolve around a recipe or someplace you go, anything at all.
A tradition. I don't know. I suppose I would say it's got to be New Year's. I mean, I live in a neighborhood that all had boys at the same time, and they all grew up together, and they're all, upper 30s. upper 20s now, but each of us did a different kind of party. So next door was always St. Patrick's Day. That direction was always Christmas. So it was moving. We were at different people's houses throughout the year, and for some reason we always did the New Year's Eve party, which was always hors d'oeuvres, like little nibbly things, which I just got to play with and to have fun and serve whatever struck my fancy. And if people didn't eat that, so I would say that's like one of my favorite traditions is cooking any strange thing that pops up into my head for fun. So I did one year. I bought a lot of little containers, little plastic Asian soup spoons and little paper containers like you get in a Chinese takeout restaurant and everything. And everything was in these vessels. And I still have all of them, in fact. And that was fun. Like it was just sort of like a poo-poo platter, kind of thing, but enormous.
Do you still do this, the New Year's Eve?
I still do New Year's Eve. Yeah, definitely.
Well, that sounds amazing. I'm sure everybody wants an invite. Are you in a phase, I think I know the answer to this, where you, in your life, where you enjoy entertaining in your home? Why or why not?
Yes. Just because I like entertaining, period. And if anyone's going to come to my house, they're welcome. And if we can cook together and eat together, yeah, always.
So for many of us, we kind of have seasons where we enjoy it. We enjoy it less, maybe because life is busier, but I suspect you have always enjoyed it.
Well, I have always enjoyed it. And I've been told by people that, once you get older and the kids are out of the house, you stop having interest in cooking. And it's exactly the opposite for me. I'm cooking more now. And I anticipate when I retire, I'm going to be cooking even more. I'll spend all day cooking. In fact, I think that's what I'm going to do today. The semester's over. I have projects and things that I need to do, but nothing that's like immediate, right? I don't know. I've got 5 or 6 hours. What can I make today that'll be really fun? I may start a bread. A friend lent me a little bit of sourdough. I just, for some reason, I haven't had a starter going lately. So I might do that. But I don't know. I've got I have this yen to do puff pastry. Don't ask me why. It's really difficult. It takes forever. Just because of the lamination. And I've done sort of rough puff, pastry. I'm not really a seasoned baker, but that's why the challenge is really interesting. Like to make a cake and not follow directions, basically, is a fun challenge for me. And for some reason, my wife and I also started watching old Great British Bake Off things. So that's kind of inspired me to make things that I didn't even know what they were, let alone, I made a ganache a couple of weeks ago, and I thought, how hard can this be? It wasn't hard at all. And rolled them up into like truffles and put powdered cocoa powder on the outside. Man, those were great. They were just like, that's as good. I mean, how bad can it be? Chocolate and cream, basically, sugar.
Sounds like a good addition to the New Year's party for this year.
Yeah, it could do. Yeah.
Okay. So when we talked before, you were in your office and you had books literally every which way, all around you. It was the most beautiful office. I love books. So can you share a couple of top resources? They could be books, websites, courses, podcasts, anything. A lot of times people just recommend their favorite books that don't have to be related to your profession, because a lot of people who listen are readers.
There are a lot of like really interesting historic cookbooks that have changed the way I think about cooking. Ptolemy Scapi is one of those. It's 1570. There's an English translation of it too, called Opera, which just means works. And it is one of those rare cookbooks that actually teaches you how to cook. It's like Julia Child in that respect, is that it'll give you different options. It says if you don't have this, use that. It's also the first place recipes for turkey showed up anywhere in the world. And there's one recipe for veal. It's kind of like a scallopini, it's rolled up and it has cheese in it and stuff. And I cook this with students using turkey as the other option. And it's got saffron and lemon, sour orange juice and cheese rolled in turkey and braised. This is so damn good. So I love that book. And I would say if anyone wants to dive into historic cooking, get a book like that. Francisco Martinez Montino's Arte de Cocina just was translated last year also. A Spanish 17th century book, which is magnificent. But if you want a kind of introduction to food history in general as a secondary source, is the class that I teach, here, just on video, and you can buy it anywhere.
Okay, great. Last question. What do you do for yourself? Maybe it's cooking. Do you have a practice, a focus, a habit, or daily routine that contributes to your success or well-being?
Yeah, so surprisingly, it's walking. I got in this habit I've been walking my whole life, but never actually tracking my steps. I do that now. And I would say, I live maybe a mile and a half from work, but I walk such that I spend 2 hours getting to work and about a half an hour getting back. But it's great because I can listen to podcasts. So I'll listen to yours, and I'm a real podcast junkie. And usually every summer before the Oxford Symposium, I usually spend a week walking 100 miles in 1 week, which is it's not as hard as it sounds. It's 14 miles a day. But, I did the South Downs last summer, which was just beautiful countryside and hills and overlooking the ocean. It was just magnificent.
Amazing. I love it. Thank you so much, Ken. It's been so wonderful talking with you.
You too.
And I've learned a lot about what we need to get back to. And hopefully other people will get back there too.
Okay. What are you cooking tonight?
I'm making lamb, like Mediterranean lamb bowls.
Ooh, that's great.
So with tzatziki and tomato and all of those things.
Lovely. Yeah, sounds great.
So, and you're going to have bread and, well, the bread won't be done. So what are you having?
Probably no. I would have to cook it tomorrow morning. I have leftover tri-tip. Obviously, I'm going to need to think of doing something with that. That might go nicely in a pie, or maybe put those in tacos, like a fajita kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll figure something out.
Petit.
Thank you.
On the Table with Ashley is presented by Amatond, an elevated, everyday, luxury home and tableware brand with products designed to cultivate connection. You can learn more about Amatond at amatendre.com or on Instagram at Amatond. By subscribing to our newsletter on the Amatond website, you'll receive updates on new episodes as well as promotions relating to Amatond and Amatond's products. Send us an email at reachoutanytime@amatond.com if you have ideas for guests or series ideas you'd like to pass along. Thanks for listening.